Welcome to Conversations at St John's Church, Kiln. I'm at the wonderful wildflower and formal gardens of Dermot and Dorothy Gillespie. In a few moments, I'm going to treat you to a conversation about St John's Church, Kiln, County Kildare. This Christian church building is approaching its bicentenary. That's a lot of memories, stories and history. In the conversation, we have Mr. Dermot Gillespie, lifelong parishioner of St John's, Miss Mabel Lyons, our oldest parishioner, 100 years young, and Dr. Ian Dalton, parishioner and published historian. So let's go inside and listen to the conversation.
We think this is the 200th anniversary of the building of the church.
Yes.
Oh.
And we're sort of sitting down here, us elderly members of the congregation,
Speak for yourself.
to see what we can remember about it and what history we can come up with, and maybe a story or two about some of the people that are buried in the graveyard. Mm-hmm. The church was built by Lord Mayo mainly, and a grant from the RCB, from the Board of First Fruits. Now, what, Ian, was the Board of First Fruits?
Well, it was an outfit that was set up in the early 19th century, essentially to try and re-equip the Church of Ireland with serviceable and new churches. A lot of the churches that had been acquired, shall we say, by the Church of Ireland at the Reformation were in dire straits. They were crumbling, they were not fit for purpose, all sorts of things. So essentially, it was part of the bargain, if you like, under the Act of Union, that because the Act of Union established the Church of Ireland and the Church of England as one church in 1800. So part of the bargain was that the Church of Ireland would be looked after. So the Board of First Fruits was essentially a government department, if you like. Employed architects to draw up common plans that could be then adapted here and there locally. Most of them are pretty utilitarian. They're not pretty. You never call them pretty churches. They don't have the character of old cathedrals or medieval churches like as in Leixlip, for instance. But they do the job, and they were built to relatively high standards. Mm-hmm. And I think, as far as I know, Kill was one of those.
That's right. When Ernest Lyons was working away in the graveyard, one of the things we discovered is that all around the church, there's a whole lot of mortar that was taken off the stones of the older church that was there, and stones were used again. Kill was built at a time when I think there was a bit of a row in Naas. And Lord Mayo had a falling out with one of the lords or the rector or something in Naas. He had started to build a big spire in Naas.
Yes, I know that story, yeah.
Yeah, and got it about halfway up and had even put a sort of a memorial in to say that this spire was built with. Had the row and left Naas and came to Kill. And I suspect, that was why he was agreeable to fund Kill, and that is why we have a lovely spire.
In some of the posher churches, the stabling would be provided for horses. St Luke's Church in Douglas and Cork, for instance, had this. And there was a charge, I think a few pence on a Sunday would be paid to park your horse, basically. So you'd have a sort of a horse parking attendant, I presume, going around collecting the money. So people wanted to be seen in it, and pews had a market value, so there would be a pew rent. I doubt whether that would have been the case in Kill.
Yeah, there were.
Was there?
When Kill was built, there were boxed pews.
Yes.
And when they did the big reorganisation in 1870 or whenever it was, they at that stage they put in the present pews. Took out a gallery that was in the church. It went at that stage.
But was that at the back of the side?
At
the back, right.
If you look carefully, you can still see the supports and where the boards that were supporting it went into the wall. But it came down at that stage.
Do you remember when the church was a lot fuller than it is now, a bigger congregation? Or has it always been a small one?
Well, it wouldn't be very full, but it certainly would have been more than...
Yeah.
You were telling me that you taught Sunday school there.
Oh, well. I don't know what authority I had for it. I suppose I thought I could do it.
And where did you do that? Did you take them up to the vestry? Or?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and in there.
I can't remember how many pupils I had, but I do remember little Violet hadn't it before them anyway, and one of them hadn't.
But, you know, we were unfortunate because we lived between the rectory and the church. So if you didn't go to church, you had a call from the rector on the way home from church.
Yes.
My best interest was the handies in Chain. They did a lot for the young people, like me, the girls, and they had, you know, Mrs. Handy had a girl's friend. She organised things for the young girls.
But, you know, another thing that my family were very strict about was Sunday observance.
Oh, yes.
You could not work, and, you know, no unnecessary work on a Sunday.
Oh, no, and you couldn't knit or anything like it.
That's right. And as for going to a GAA game, that was causing people to work.
Or go to a dance or anything like
That's
that.
why they used to have Church of Ireland socials on a Friday night rather than a Saturday, because they spilt over into Sunday.
Oh, I didn't
It also
realise
gave you
that.
a day longer to recover from them.
Roberta Hill was telling me, you know, her memory of going to church was that they had to dress up, they had to have their hats and their best dress
the hats, yeah.
and the little white gloves. And then they set off from Elasty to walk to church. And if they were lucky, they got a lift, and if they weren't, they had to walk all the way there and all the way back.
No, it's unbelievable the way they've treated Sunday now. It's a working day and everywhere is open. And it's a real working day. They don't dress up, they don't. It's just the same as every day.
Same as every day.
Yeah, well, here during the lockdown, you know, sort of one day was exactly the same as another day.
Yeah.
Except, of course, that I used to get into my good clothes on Sunday and I didn't work. And that way I knew when the start of the week was each week.
It's important. Yeah,
The interesting thing, I suppose, about Anglican churches largely is that there's usually quite a lot of interesting stuff on the inside in terms of things like memorial tablets, which tell you something usually about the great and the good rather than the ordinary people, because these were the ones who had the money to put them up. But there's some very fine ones inside Kilchurch. Big brass memorials sitting on the wall to Earls of Clonmel, Countesses of Clonmel. And one of the more unobtrusive ones is to Dermot Richard Wyndham Burke, the 7th Earl of Mayo. And on it neatly captures the sort of a period around the revolutionary period, you'd call it, from 1912 to 1920, 23. So here he is as a representative peer for Ireland, and he remains such until 1927 when he died. And a member of His Majesty's most honourable Privy Council for Ireland, but also, of course, a senator of the Irish Free State, which
He was both.
Of course, Lord de Mayo's big house at Palmerston was burnt down during the Civil War.
That's right.
Because he was a senator and the anti-treatyites. There's a fascinating report in the Leinster Leader in 1925 where Lord Mayo sought compensation for the burning of the house. It's a verbatim report of the court case. Fascinating stuff. And Mayo himself appeared. I mean, he made it plain, unlike a lot of people who were burnt out during the War of Independence, the Civil War, but he wanted to rebuild Palmerston. He wanted to live there. So he sought and got money from the new Irish state under the compensation things for rebuilding it. But it was formerly a house which had a sort of a mansard roof on it, but that was too expensive, so it was effectively a flat roof that was put back on. But Mayo argues vigorously about why he wants to come back to Ireland and wants to live again where he grew up as a child, and it's quite evocative stuff. It's sort of putting down a marker to say, I might be a Protestant, but I'm an Irishman as well. I want to live here. So Dermot, the 7th Earl of Mayo is, now his father was, he was the Governor General, he was a Viceroy of India,
yeah.
and was assassinated by a madman in the Andaman Islands, I think. So the history of the family is quite exotic, but it shows you that these were public servants, if you like. They had the money and they had the time to do it, but they contributed their own little bit to what they saw was an important part of their lives at the time. And it's all memorialised inside in the church. That's the nice thing.
Well, Lady Mayo was she started the nursing, the voluntary health nursing. Lady Mayo.
Did she?
Yes, she was a great person.
Right, and would you have met her, Mabel?
I can't remember now. No, wouldn't it be? I'd have probably been very young, but I know she had a lot to do with the nursing and started the voluntary nursing. They travelled around to old people and did a lot of nursing for children, and they were very good. And she started that now. That was Lady Mayo.
There's another memorial in the church, and I've always been curious about it. It's erected to the Reverend Storer Little Hales. And the Reverend Storer Little Hales was rector there, and he died young, and he died, if you read the memorial, administering to people with, I'm not sure that it says the plague, but certainly some pestilence or what have you.
Yes.
And I've often wondered what happened. Now, this guy died before the church was built, as far as I know. He's actually buried in the graveyard, but as well as that, when I was growing up, there was a field up in Hartwell. I think it was Hartwell. That was called the Hospital Field.
Yes.
And I've often wondered, why was there a hospital field?
But it was a hospital field, I know that, called the hospital field. But it must have been at the time when there was a terrible outbreak.
Yeah, well, maybe that's tied into the
Maybe it is, I don't know. I'd be very curious if I could find out. But the first organist I can remember there is Mrs. Jackson. Now, she was a cousin of Richard Cunningham, and she lived just down the village. But you would be out of breath after the first verse. She had Dorcas Rawlins.
Oh, and she was a great help, singing and playing, and lovely. Great help. We missed her very much, didn't we?
Yeah. There was a Mrs. Vincent that lived in a house in the church grounds that used to blow the organ. And they did it for years. Now, ultimately, we had an organist, Miss Hickson, and between her and I think Mrs. Jackson and indeed Dorcas, I used to pump that organ. Now, I can tell you, there's a little lump of lead on a twine that goes up and down depending on how full the bellows are. And you know, so if an organist that does all the notes, this thing goes. You'd be
pumping away.
Yeah, and it's, you know, so when the organ was in its last days, the bellows were leaking. And
it's like human beings, really.
You really had to keep going.
Yes,
but in the olden days, when if you like, when Mabel and I were going, the grass in front of the church was cut once a year for hay.
Hay.
That's right. And it was cut with a scythe.
Yeah.
And I can remember, now maybe Bobby Kelly doing it. And I can remember that my father wouldn't have had too much money, but he had the collection. And I think it was something like £2 or £3 that it cost to get it done. And he gave it to Bobby Kelly in coin. And Bobby got it, and he says, I won't blow away anyway.
But those were in the days when, was this when Kill was a separate parish still?
No, it was part of Naas at that stage.
Right, so there, yeah.
And there was a curate dealt with Kill and Rathmore.
The man in Naas used to, the old man,
Clover.
yeah, Canon Clover rode his bicycle out to Kill.
Did he?
Yeah, now who in this day and age would ride a bicycle out and do the service?
Yeah.
There you are.
Archdeacon Clover. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful name. Yeah.
You were saying, Mabel, that it was Archdeacon Peacock at that time.
Yeah. He was
He was the last rector, wasn't
Yes, he was getting old too, like in the...
Oh, Kill was a separate parish at that
Oh,
stage.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
he? It was only in 1945 that we were combined with Naas.
Was it 45? Yeah.
45.
During the war and that time.
Yeah.
Starting to...
But the rectory was Killeen House. It is across the dual carriageway. I would always think of it as Peter Sweetman's or...
Yeah, it passed over to...
Sweetman's
he took
house.
it over, yeah, Peter Sweetman.
But it was the other side, a nice Georgian house. Again, if you look at the vestry minutes, way back around 1900, George Gillespie climbed up into the tower to stop the drip. You then go on and Richard Gillespie climbed up into the tower to stop the drip. And then Ernest Lyons climbed up into the tower and the drip stopped.
The drip stopped.
Oh, well, he would do daring things. Ernest was unbelievable,
Yeah.
the things he did.
Yeah.
It's a pity that we didn't interview him, because he had a lot of knowledge about everything, the church, everything, I think.
Yeah.
He took a great interest in Kill
did.
Church, trying to revive it at the time.
Yeah, when he came back to Kill, Kill Church was as usual on its last legs. And Ernest, came in like a storm and things had to be done. And he was largely responsible for cleaning up the graveyard. And Ernest energised us and the tidy towns and proceeded in to clear the graveyard. Now, my memory of Ernest clearing the graveyard was Ernest had a digger, and the digger was as old as Ernest. And, the arm on the digger would swing like that, and he had to,
Yeah. It's like playing a video game.
That's right. And Richard O'Neill was there to mind him. And Richard was so calm and collected and what have you, and nothing had to happen. Richard would be there.
That's right.
But the fact that we can even see the tombstones or the gravestones is due to Ernie. There's never been any problem being a Protestant in Kill. I don't know about you, Mabel, but I've never been called names or that sort of thing.
And I went to the Catholic school, and I never remember being having any trouble. I had friends.
It was a lovely place to grow up.
Yeah.
Now you were separate, you were different.
Yes.
But you were part of the community as well.
Community as well. That's why a lot of Protestants sort of opted out of the new state in 1922, more than we recognise opted in, mainly through, I think, a sense of duty and a sense that they still wanted to be part of a place that they called home.
But I went to the convent school and I never suffered any. I had great friends, had them to the day they died. Some of them now, unfortunately, have passed away earlier than me, but like the Osborns and all, a lot of people that I would have been very friendly with.
There was never any hint of hostility or anything. We were looked upon as curiosities rather than as anything else. They were checking how many fingers we had on our hands and that sort of stuff, and whether our feet were bigger than or smaller than the norm. But it was that sort of curiosity.
It's always been lovely.
Well, I've letter from the nuns still, but all the nuns are gone, my old nuns, but they remembered me, she said. Well, I had from the head and the nuns at the moment, I had a letter from her, during my birthday.
Lovely.
And they spoke about me, knowing me.
Yes.
Through hearing about me.
Brilliant.
So I must have been all right in the school.
You
I
must
was the
have
only
been
one, I think, of the Protestant, I think, in the school at the time.
But, if you think about it, I can remember We've been involved in a gymkhana for fundraising. We've had sales of work in the church grounds.
Yeah.
We have had all priests show.
Yes.
And we've even had a night of the dogs. You know, again, in aid of the church. I know I got into fierce trouble over this night in the dogs. I had two uncles clergymen, and one of them says, well, sure, you have to do what you have to do. And the other one told me that I'd nearly be damned in hell for it. So
Good. The Kill Singers
Right.
were helpful.
Yeah.
They subscribed to us, didn't they, in a big way?
Oh, yeah.
And they were made up from some of our members.
You know, there are so few of us that if people like that weren't interested in using the church and so on, it would be a very desolate place. You know, basically, there are only 3 or 4 families that have been there a long time and would be involved in keeping the church and so on. And without this sort of support, well, should we be long gone?
What a fascinating conversation about St. John's. I'm sure that there are many more stories to tell. Hopefully you've been given a flavour of the rich tapestry of the history of St. John's, a Christian site since early times in County Kildare, the building, its people, the memorials, the community of which it is a part. A 200-year anniversary booklet detailing the history of the church will be available from September. To keep in touch, subscribe to our Facebook or YouTube channels. You'll find all the information on our website, naasunion.com. And may God bless you, and thank you for watching.